My in-laws came to dinner and my father-in-law said modern women ruin marriages by working, so I decided to quit my job to start a business, but first we pranked him saying we needed his retirement money and he freaked out, then called me names when we revealed it was fake and his own affair was exposed. I, 32F, have been with my husband Michael, 34M, for 8 years now, married for 5. We live in Fullerton, which is about 40 minutes outside the city. Michael works as an architect at a firm downtown and I've been working in supply chain management for the past decade. The pay has been decent and the work kept me busy, but I can't say I ever loved it. Michael's parents are Julian, 67M, and Bonnie, 64F. They live in the suburbs about 20 minutes from us. Bonnie is nice enough. She taught elementary school for 30 years before retiring and she's always been welcoming to me. Julian is a different story. He worked in manufacturing his whole career and he's very set in his ways about how things should be. He has strong opinions about everything from politics to how people should dress to church. Michael told me early on that his dad was old-fashioned but that he mellows out if you don't push back too hard. The thing about Julian is that he never directly tells you what he thinks. He drops hints. He makes comments. He'll say things like my mother never worked a day after she got married, or women these days don't know what they're missing staying home. At family dinners he'd bring up articles he read about how dual-income households are ruining family values. I learned pretty quickly that the best way to deal with Julian was to just nod and change the subject. Michael called it my strategy of pretending to be deaf when convenient. My parents are different. My mom Barbara, 61F, worked as a nurse and my dad Tom, 63F, was a high school teacher. They both retired 2 years ago and they're the type who think everyone should do what makes them happy. They met Julian and Bonnie a few times over the years at holidays and weddings. The conversations were always polite but stiff. About 6 months ago things at my job started getting worse. The company went through a merger and suddenly everyone was scrambling. My manager quit and they didn't replace her. They just distributed her work among the rest of us. I was putting in 60-hour weeks and getting emails at midnight. I'd come home and Michael would already have dinner ready because I was too tired to function. On weekends I'd sleep until noon just to recover. I started thinking about quitting. I'd mentioned to Michael a year before that I wanted to start my own consulting business. I had the experience and the contacts. The only thing holding me back was fear and the steady paycheck. But after 6 months of the merger chaos I was ready. Michael and I talked about it seriously. We ran the numbers. We had savings. His salary could cover our basic expenses. It would be tight for a while but it was doable. He told me to go for it. Then my boss called me into her office. She said corporate was impressed with how I'd handled the transition period. They wanted to offer me a promotion. It came with a title change to senior director and a raise that was substantial. The catch was I'd have to relocate to the main office in Center City, which was 2 hours away. She said I could work remotely 3 days a week but I'd need to be in the office Tuesdays and Wednesdays for meetings. I told her I needed time to think about it. The truth was I'd already checked out mentally. The promotion felt like a bribe to keep me from leaving. I went home and told Michael about the offer. He asked what I wanted to do. I said I wanted to turn it down and start my business like we'd planned. He said then that's what I should do. 2 weeks after that conversation we had dinner at Julian and Bonnie's house. My parents were invited too because it was Bonnie's birthday. She'd made a roast and Julian had set up the dining room with the good china. Everyone was talking about Bonnie's plans to take a painting class and my dad was telling a story about one of his former students who'd just published a book. I wasn't paying much attention to the conversation. I was thinking about how I was going to tell my boss I was turning down the promotion. My mom asked me something about work and I said without thinking that they'd offered me a promotion to senior director but I'd have to spend more time at the Center City office. My parents got excited. My mom said that was wonderful news. My dad asked about the pay increase. Julian put down his fork. His face changed. He didn't say anything right away but I saw him look at Michael and then back at his plate. Bonnie asked if I was going to take it. I said I was still deciding. Julian cleared his throat. He said back when he was working a wife didn't need to chase promotions. He said a good husband should be able to provide for his family without his wife working herself into the ground. Michael jumped in and said times had changed. Julian ignored him. He kept going. He said he'd read studies about how children suffer when mothers prioritize careers. He said women are naturally better at creating a peaceful home and men are naturally better at earning. He said it's not about being sexist, it's just biology and history. Bonnie told him to stop. My dad looked uncomfortable. My mom asked if anyone wanted more wine. Julian kept talking. He said if I took this promotion and spent even more time away from home, how was I supposed to take care of Michael properly? He said ambitious women always end up divorced because they forget what marriage is supposed to be about. Michael stood up. He told his father that was enough. Julian said he was just trying to help. He said if they'd had this conversation when Michael first started dating me, maybe things would have turned out differently. Bonnie started clearing plates even though people were still eating. Julian said at least his generation understood that a man takes care of his wife, not the other way around. We left soon after that. My parents followed us out. In the driveway my mom hugged me and said to ignore Julian. My dad said he was out of line. Michael was quiet on the drive home. When we got inside, he apologized for his father. I told him it wasn't his fault. But something Julian said had actually stuck with me. Not the stuff about women staying home. The part about working myself into the ground. He was right about that even if his reasoning was garbage. I was burning out. I didn't want this promotion. I didn't want to spend more time in that office. I wanted out. I told Michael the first was going to quit. Not because of what Julian said but because it reminded me what I actually wanted. Michael said we should mess with his dad a little bit first. We came up with a plan. Michael would call Julian and tell him I'd quit my job. He'd say I'd taken Julian's advice to heart and decided to be a traditional wife. But he'd also say that our lifestyle in Fullerton was expensive and we'd been depending on my income. Now that I wasn't working, we were struggling. Since Julian had been the one to suggest I quit, it was only fair that he help us out financially until we got back on our feet. Michael called his dad the next afternoon. I was sitting next to him listening. Michael told Julian I'd quit. There was a pause on the other end. Julian asked why. Michael said I'd realized Julian was right about women not needing to work so hard. Julian sounded pleased. He said that was a smart decision. Then Michael shifted gears. He said we'd run into a problem. Our mortgage and car payments and everything else added up to more than what his salary covered. My paycheck had been covering about 40% of our monthly expenses. Now we were short. Julian asked if we'd tried cutting back on unnecessary things. Michael said we'd already done that. He said we'd canceled our streaming services and stopped eating out, and Bonnie's birthday dinner had been the first time we'd bought wine in a month. He said we'd calculated it out and we needed about $2,000 a month to make up the difference. There was a long silence. Then Julian asked why Michael was telling him this. Michael said because it had been Julian's idea for me to quit. Julian had convinced me that being a traditional wife was the right choice. So as the patriarch of the family, Julian should help us since he'd given the advice. Julian started talking about budgeting strategies. Michael cut him off. He said he'd grown up comfortable and Julian had always provided for the family. It didn't seem fair that Michael should have to struggle now because he'd followed his father's guidance. Julian said maybe I should just go back to work. Michael said I'd already turned in my resignation. It was too late. Julian asked what about my parents. Michael said we'd already asked them and they'd said it was Julian's advice so Julian should deal with the consequences. That wasn't true but Julian didn't know that. Michael said we needed an answer soon because rent was due in 2 weeks. Julian said he'd think about it and hung up. Michael looked at me and started laughing. I asked if he really thought his dad would fall for it. Michael said his dad's biggest fear was spending his retirement money on anyone but himself. Over the next 10 days Michael called Julian 4 more times. Each time he'd bring up bills or expenses or ask for advice on which utility to cut. Julian would try to suggest cheaper alternatives. Michael would explain why those wouldn't work and circle back to needing money. By the end of the second week Julian was barely sleeping according to Bonnie, who'd called Michael separately to ask what was going on. Then Julian showed up at our house on a Saturday morning. He didn't call first. He just knocked on the door. Michael let him in. I was in the kitchen and I stayed there while they talked in the living room. Julian said he wanted to apologize. He said he'd been too harsh at dinner. He said modern women like me should work if they want to. He said he'd spoken out of turn and he hoped there were no hard feelings. Michael asked if that meant Julian would help us with the money. Julian's voice got tight. He said he'd been thinking about it and maybe it would be better if I looked for a new job instead. Something part-time that wouldn't be so demanding. Michael said that wouldn't solve the immediate problem. Julian said he couldn't just hand over $2,000 a month from his retirement fund. That's when I walked into the living room. I told Julian I had good news. I hadn't actually quit my job to be a housewife. I'd quit to start my own consulting business. Michael and I were fine financially. We didn't need his money. We'd made the whole thing up. Julian stared at me. Then he turned to Michael. Michael said his dad needed to understand what it actually meant when he spouted off about traditional gender roles. It wasn't just about women staying home. It was about men carrying the full financial burden. Julian had been so quick to criticize my working, but the second he thought he might have to contribute to our household he'd panicked. Julian's face went red. He started yelling. He called me manipulative. He said I'd brainwashed his son. He said I was the type of woman who ruins families. He used a word I won't repeat here but it rhymes with witch and starts with a B. Michael told him to get out. Julian said he wasn't leaving until Michael came to his senses. Michael walked to the door and opened it. He told his father if he didn't leave right now he'd never be welcome back. Julian looked at me and said something about women like me always causing problems. Then he left. Michael closed the door. He stood there for a minute without saying anything. Then he went upstairs. I heard the bedroom door close. I called Bonnie that evening. She picked up on the first ring. She said Julian had told her what happened. She said I owed Julian an apology. I asked if she knew what Julian had called me. She said he was upset and people say things they don't mean when they're upset. I said he'd meant it. She said I'd humiliated him and I should have just let him give his opinion at dinner without making such a big deal out of it. I told her Michael and I hadn't done anything wrong. Julian had disrespected me in our marriage. Bonnie said I'd tricked him. I said he'd only been tricked into showing who he really was. Bonnie said she didn't want to discuss it further and hung up. Michael came downstairs an hour later. He said he'd texted his mom and told her if she was going to take his dad's side then he was done with both of them. He said he wasn't going to watch his father treat me like that and then have his mother defend it. My parents called the next day. Michael had filled them in on what happened. My dad said Julian got what he deserved. My mom said she was proud of me for standing up for myself. That helped. It's been 3 months since then. I filed the business paperwork in July. I spent August building the website and reaching out to former colleagues. September was a blur of contracts and client meetings. The business is actually doing better than I expected. I've signed 4 clients already and I'm in talks with 2 more. Michael has been handling most of the cooking and cleaning while I get everything set up. He works from home 2 days a week now, so he's around more. He hasn't spoken to his parents since that day. Bonnie texted him a few times asking him to reconsider. He didn't respond. I could tell he was struggling with it even though he didn't say much. He'd check his phone more often than usual. One night I found him looking at old photos on his computer from when he was a kid. His mom was in most of them. So, I did something without telling him first. I called Bonnie and asked if she'd meet me for coffee. She hesitated but then agreed. We met at a place halfway between our houses on a Wednesday morning when I knew Julian would be at his golf club. I didn't apologize because I wasn't sorry. But I told Bonnie that Michael missed her. I said he was stubborn like his father and he wouldn't reach out first, but I could see it was eating at him. Bonnie said she missed him too. She said Julian wouldn't allow any contact until we apologized. I said Julian wasn't going to get an apology and that put Bonnie in a position where she had to choose. She sat there stirring her coffee for a while. Then she asked what I wanted her to do. I said I was having a launch event for my business in 2 weeks. It was going to be at a small venue in Fullerton with potential clients and some friends. I wanted her to come. Without Julian. She said she didn't know if she could do that. I said she could and she should because her son needed his mother. Then I left. I didn't tell Michael about the coffee meeting. The launch event was scheduled for a Friday evening. I'd rented a space above a restaurant downtown. About 30 people had RSVP'd. Michael helped me set up the tables and the banner with my company name. People started arriving around 6. I was talking to a potential client when I saw Bonnie walk in. She was alone. Michael was across the room. He turned and saw her. He didn't move at first. Then he walked over and they hugged. Bonnie was crying. Michael's eyes were wet too, but he wasn't making any sound. They talked in the corner for about 20 minutes while I dealt with the other guests. When I finally made it over there, Bonnie hugged me too. She said she was sorry for how things had gone. She said she'd told Julian she was coming and he'd said if she walked out the door she shouldn't bother coming back. She'd walked out anyway. The rest of the event went smoothly. By the end of the night I had 2 more clients confirmed and several others who wanted to schedule follow-up meetings. Michael and Bonnie left together to get dinner. He came home around 11 and said they'd talk for hours. She'd told him Julian had barely spoken to her in the 3 months since the fight. He spent most of his time in his workshop in the garage. Bonnie started coming by our house every couple of weeks after that. She never mentioned Julian and neither did Michael. As far as I know, Julian still doesn't know she's been seeing us. Last month I found out I'm pregnant. We weren't trying, but we weren't preventing it either. I'm about 8 weeks along now. Michael is thrilled. Bonnie is thrilled. My parents are thrilled. I haven't told Julian and I don't plan to. Michael said his mom keeps asking if she should tell Julian about the baby. Michael said no. He said when Julian is ready to apologize for what he said to me and for how he's treated his own son, then they can talk. Until then, Julian doesn't get to be part of this. The ironic part is Julian's dream was probably something like this. His daughter-in-law at home raising his grandkids. Except I'll be running my business from home and he won't be around to see any of it because he couldn't keep his opinions to himself. I'm due in May. The business is growing. Michael and I are figuring out how we'll manage everything once the baby comes. His firm is letting him go fully remote, which will help. My parents already offered to babysit once or twice a week. I haven't heard from Julian at all. Bonnie says he asks about Michael sometimes, but he's too proud to reach out. She says he tells people we turned his son against him. According to her, he's lost weight and he barely leaves the house except for his golf league on Wednesdays. Part of me wonders if I should care about that. But mostly I don't. He chose this. He could end it any time by picking up the phone and apologizing. He won't because that would mean admitting he was wrong. So that's where things stand now. I don't know if Julian will come around before the baby is born. I don't know if he'll come around at all. Michael says he's done waiting for his father to act like a decent person. I'm just focused on getting ready for this baby and keeping my business running. Update 1. This is an update to my previous post about quitting my job and the situation with my father-in-law Julian. Things have gotten worse and I need to write this down because I'm still processing what happened. About 2 weeks after my last post, Michael got a call from his uncle Dan. Dan is Julian's younger brother and he lives about 3 hours away in Clarkston. Michael hasn't seen him in probably 5 years. They were never close, but Dan would show up to family gatherings occasionally. Dan said he'd heard through Bonnie that Michael and Julian weren't speaking. He wanted to meet up with Michael to talk about it. Michael was suspicious, but Dan said he wasn't taking sides and he just wanted to understand what happened. Michael agreed to meet him for lunch. They met at a diner halfway between our house and where Dan was visiting some friends. Michael called me after and said it had gone fine. Dan had asked what the fight was about and Michael gave him the short version. Dan said Julian had always been stubborn and he wasn't surprised. He told Michael that family was important and not to let pride get in the way of reconciliation. Michael said it wasn't about pride and Dan dropped it. What Michael didn't know was that Dan had gone straight to Julian after that lunch and told him everything. Including the part about me being pregnant. Bonnie called me the next day. She was upset. She said Julian knew about the baby and he was furious that she'd been hiding it from him. He'd accused her of betraying him and choosing Michael over their marriage. Bonnie said she'd tried to explain but Julian had stormed out of the house and she didn't know where he'd gone. He showed up at our house that evening. Michael and I were eating dinner when the doorbell rang. Michael opened it and Julian pushed past him into the house. He looked terrible. His shirt was wrinkled and his hair was sticking up like he'd been running his hands through it. He said he couldn't believe we'd kept the pregnancy from him. He said no matter what had happened between us he had a right to know he was going to be a grandfather. Michael said he'd lost that right when he called me names and refused to apologize. Julian said he'd come to talk, not to argue. I stayed in the kitchen. I could hear everything but I didn't want to be in the same room as him. Julian said he'd had time to think. He said maybe he'd been too harsh at Bonnie's birthday dinner. He said he came from a different generation and things were different back then. He said he didn't understand why Michael couldn't just accept that his father had different values. Michael said he could accept different values. What he couldn't accept was disrespect. Julian said he'd never disrespected anyone. Michael reminded him what he'd called me. Julian said that was different because I deliberately humiliated him. I walked into the living room then. I asked Julian how exactly I'd humiliated him. Julian said I'd made him think we were struggling financially and played on his conscience. I said his conscience wouldn't have bothered him if he actually believed what he preached. If he really thought wives should stay home then he should have been happy to support us. Instead, he'd panicked the second it affected his retirement fund. Julian said that wasn't the point. The point was I'd lied. I said he'd been lying for years. Every time he made a comment about women working or implied I was a bad wife for having a career he was lying about respecting me. Julian said I was twisting his words. Michael told him he needed to leave. Julian said he wasn't leaving until this was resolved. He said he wanted to be part of his grandchild's life and we were being unreasonable. Michael said being part of the baby's life started with apologizing to me. A real apology. Not some half-hearted excuse about generational differences. Julian looked at me. He said fine. He was sorry if I'd been offended by anything he'd said. I said that wasn't an apology. He said what else did I want from him? I said I wanted him to admit he'd been wrong. I wanted him to say that what he'd said to me was cruel and uncalled for. I wanted him to acknowledge that his views on women were outdated and harmful. Julian's jaw tightened. He said he wasn't going to stand there and denounce everything he believed in just to make me feel better. I said then we had nothing else to talk about. Julian turned to Michael and said he couldn't believe his own son would choose his wife over his father. Michael said he'd chosen his wife over a bully and Julian should leave now. Julian left. Bonnie called Michael 10 minutes later. She said Julian had come home ranting about how disrespectful we'd been. She said she'd told him he needed to give a proper apology and he told her to stay out of it. She said she was worried about him because he wasn't sleeping and he'd stopped eating regularly. Michael said that wasn't our problem. Bonnie said she wasn't asking us to fix it but she wanted us to know what was happening. Then she said something that stuck with me. She said Julian had always been proud and controlling but it had gotten worse since he retired. He didn't have work to focus on anymore so he was fixating on the family. She said she'd been making excuses for him for years but she was tired. 2 days later Bonnie called again. This time she was crying. She said Julian had told her he wanted a separation. He'd said if she was going to keep seeing Michael behind his back and taking our side then their marriage was over. Bonnie said she'd told him that was ridiculous but he'd already called a lawyer. Michael drove to his parents' house immediately. I stayed home. He was gone for 3 hours. When he came back he said his dad had moved into the guest bedroom and wasn't speaking to his mom. Bonnie was devastated. Michael had tried to talk to Julian but Julian had refused to open the bedroom door. The next few weeks were tense. Bonnie would call with updates. Julian had opened a separate bank account. Julian had spoken to a divorce attorney. Julian was looking at apartments. It was surreal. Their marriage was falling apart and it all traced back to that dinner at Bonnie's birthday. Michael started blaming himself. He'd stop mid-conversation and stare at nothing. He'd wake up in the middle of the night and I'd find him sitting in the living room in the dark. I told him it wasn't his fault. He said if we hadn't played that prank on Julian none of this would have happened. I said if Julian hadn't been a judgmental person in the first place none of it would have happened. But Michael wasn't hearing it. He called Dan and asked him to talk to Julian. Dan said he'd tried but Julian had hung up on him. He said Julian felt like everyone was ganging up on him and demanding he change who he was. Last week Bonnie came over for dinner. She looked exhausted. She said Julian had signed a lease on a one-bedroom apartment across town. He was moving out at the end of the month. She said she'd begged him to reconsider, but he'd said the marriage had been dying for years and the situation with Michael just made it clear they wanted different things. Bonnie said she didn't know what to do. Michael asked if she wanted to stay with us for a while. She said no. She said the house was hers too and she wasn't leaving. But she asked if we'd consider reaching out to Julian one more time. She said maybe if Michael initiated contact Julian would soften. Michael said no. He said he'd already tried and Julian had made it clear he wasn't interested in apologizing. Bonnie started crying. She said her marriage was ending and her husband was about to become a stranger and she felt like everyone expected her to just accept it. Michael hugged her and said he was sorry but he couldn't fix this. After Bonnie left, Michael told me he felt like he was watching his family implode. I said his father was making a choice. Michael said it didn't feel like a choice. It felt like consequences spiraling out of control. I don't know what happens next. Julian moves out in 2 weeks. Bonnie is staying in the house. Michael barely speaks about it anymore. When he does, he sounds defeated. I'm 17 weeks pregnant now. My business is stable. I have 6 regular clients and I'm hiring a part-time assistant to help with administrative work. Everything should feel good but it doesn't. There's this heaviness in the house that won't go away. People keep asking if I feel guilty. Honestly, I don't know. I don't think we did anything wrong. But I also didn't expect it to go this far. I thought Julian would eventually apologize and we'd all move on with some new boundaries in place. I didn't think his marriage would end. I didn't think Michael would stop sleeping through the night. So that's the update. Julian is moving out. Bonnie is heartbroken. Michael is shutting down. And I'm just trying to keep everything together while growing a human. Update to another update. Things have continued to deteriorate, but there's been a development I didn't see coming. Julian moved out 6 weeks ago. He's living in a small apartment on the other side of town. According to Bonnie, he bought a new television and a recliner and that's about it. She says the place is depressing. He eats frozen dinners and watches cable news all day. Bonnie has been spending more time with us. She comes over twice a week now. She helps me organize the nursery and she's been teaching Michael how to cook some of his childhood favorites. She seems lighter without Julian around, but she also seems sad in a way that's hard to describe. She'll be laughing 1 minute and then she'll go quiet and stare out the window. Michael filed paperwork to formally change his emergency contact information at work from Julian to me. He updated his beneficiaries on his life insurance. Small things that felt significant. He said he was accepting that his father had made a choice and they were done. Then 3 weeks ago Michael got a text from a number he didn't recognize. The message said it was time they talked and included an address for a coffee shop downtown. Michael thought it was spam until he realized the area code matched Clarkston. It was Dan. Michael ignored it. Dan texted again 2 days later saying it was important. Michael finally responded and asked what he wanted. Dan said he needed to show Michael something but it had to be in person. Michael told him he wasn't interested. Dan said it was about Julian and Bonnie and Michael needed to see it before making any decisions. Michael agreed to meet him the following Saturday. I asked if he wanted me to come but he said no. He drove to the coffee shop and Dan was already there waiting. Michael said Dan looked nervous. He had a folder with him. Dan said he needed to tell Michael something and he debated for weeks whether he should. Michael said to just get on with it. Dan opened the folder and slid some papers across the table. They were bank statements. Julian's bank statements. Michael didn't understand at first. Dan explained that he'd helped Julian set up the new account when Julian moved out. Dan worked in banking and Julian had asked for his help. While Dan was helping him transfer money, he'd noticed something odd. There were regular withdrawals going back almost 2 years. $500 every month being transferred to an account Dan didn't recognize. Dan said he'd asked Julian about it. Julian had brushed it off and said it was none of Dan's business. But Dan couldn't let it go. He'd looked up the account number and tracked it to a woman named Jennifer Foster. Dan knew that name because Jennifer had worked at the same manufacturing plant as Julian 20 years ago. Michael told Dan to stop. Dan said he needed to hear this. Dan had done some digging and found out Jennifer lived in Millbrook, which was about an hour from where Julian and Bonnie lived. Dan had driven to Millbrook one afternoon and confirmed that the address matched where the money was being sent. He'd seen Julian's car parked in the driveway. Michael sat there trying to process what Dan was telling him. Dan said he'd confronted Julian about it last week. Julian had finally admitted that he'd been seeing Jennifer for the past 3 years. It wasn't physical, he claimed. They were just friends. But he'd been sending her money to help with her expenses because she was on disability and couldn't work. Michael asked why Dan was telling him this. Dan said because Bonnie deserved to know the truth. And because Julian's whole crusade about traditional marriage and family values was built on hypocrisy. Dan said he felt guilty for telling Julian about the pregnancy and he wanted to make it right. Michael took photos of the bank statements with his phone. Then he left without saying anything else to Dan. He called me from the car. He sounded strange. Distant. He said he needed to talk to his mom and he'd be home later. He went straight to Bonnie's house. She was in the garden when he arrived. Michael showed her the bank statements. Bonnie sat down on the porch steps and read through them without speaking. When she finished, she asked where he'd gotten them. Michael told her about Dan and Jennifer Foster. Bonnie said she'd suspected something years ago. Julian had become secretive with his phone. He'd started taking long drives on weekend afternoons and coming back in better moods. She'd convinced herself she was being paranoid. She'd never said anything because she didn't want to know if she was right. Michael asked what she was going to do. Bonnie said she didn't know. She asked if he was going to tell Julian that he knew. Michael said he hadn't decided yet. Bonnie said she wanted to handle it herself first. She asked Michael not to say anything until she'd had a chance to talk to Julian. That was 3 weeks ago. Bonnie called Julian and asked him to meet her at the house. He came over the next day. Bonnie told him she knew about Jennifer. Julian didn't deny it. He said it wasn't what she thought. Bonnie said it didn't matter what it was. What mattered was he'd been lying for years while lecturing everyone else about morality and traditional values. Julian said Jennifer was just a friend who needed help. Bonnie asked if she was supposed to believe that. Julian said believe what she wanted. Bonnie told him to get out and not come back until the divorce papers were finalized. Michael heard all this from Bonnie later that evening. She'd called him after Julian left. She said she'd contacted a divorce attorney and filed paperwork the next morning. She said she was done making excuses for Julian. She said she should have left him years ago, but she'd been afraid of being alone at her age. Julian called Michael 2 days after that. Michael let it go to voicemail. The message said Michael had poisoned Bonnie against him and destroyed their family. Julian said Michael would regret taking his mother's side when he realized how manipulative women could be. Michael deleted the voicemail without responding. I'm 25 weeks pregnant now. We had the anatomy scan last week and everything looks healthy. We're having a boy. Bonnie cried when we told her. She said Julian had always wanted a grandson. The nursery is almost finished. Michael painted it a soft gray and Bonnie bought a bookshelf that Michael assembled last weekend. My business is doing well enough that I've stopped taking new clients until after the baby is born. I'm setting up systems so my assistant can handle most of the day-to-day work while I'm on leave. Bonnie is moving forward with the divorce. She stopped talking about Julian except to give Michael updates on the legal process. She seems stronger now. She joined a book club and she's talking about taking a trip to visit her sister in Colorado next spring. Julian sent Michael an email last week. It was long and rambling. He said he'd made mistakes, but so had Michael. He said families were supposed to forgive each other. He said he was willing to move past everything if Michael would just call him and talk like adults. Michael didn't respond. I asked Michael if he felt vindicated now that they knew about Jennifer. He said no. He said it just made him sad. His whole childhood his dad had preached about honor and values and doing the right thing. And the whole time he'd been lying to everyone including himself. So that's where we are. Julian is facing a divorce and exposure as a hypocrite. Bonnie is building a new life. Michael is trying to prepare for fatherhood while processing the collapse of his family. And I'm watching it all unfold while trying to stay focused on the baby and the business. Update 3 Final update here. The baby came early. I went into labor at 36 weeks. Everything happened fast. Michael drove me to the hospital and they admitted me immediately. Labor lasted 8 hours. Our son was born healthy at 6 pounds 2 ounces. We named him Oliver. Bonnie was at the hospital within an hour of getting Michael's call. She stayed through the whole thing. She held Oliver for the first time in the recovery room and she didn't put him down for 30 minutes. My parents arrived the next morning. My mom brought food and my dad brought a stuffed elephant that was bigger than the baby. Michael called Julian 3 days after Oliver was born. He didn't plan to. But Bonnie had been hinting that Julian should at least know he had a grandson. Michael called and left a voicemail with the basic information. Name, weight, length. He said Julian could meet Oliver if he wanted, but it would be supervised and brief. Julian never called back. 2 weeks later we got a card in the mail. It was addressed to Michael and inside was a check for $5,000 made out to Oliver. There was a note that said congratulations and that Julian hoped to meet his grandson when everyone was ready. No apology. No acknowledgement of anything that had happened. Just money and vague well wishes. Michael tore up the check. Bonnie said that was probably for the best. She said Julian was trying to buy his way back in without doing the actual work of repairing anything. The divorce was finalized last month. Bonnie got the house and half of Julian's retirement fund. Julian kept his pension and the apartment. Bonnie has been coming over almost every day since Oliver was born. She helps with feedings and laundry and she'll hold him while I sleep. Michael took 3 weeks off work and now he's back but working from home full time. We're figuring out a rhythm. It's exhausting but it's good. My business is on hold until January. My assistant is handling the existing clients and I'm checking emails once a day. The plan is to ease back in slowly and see how it goes. Michael and I talked about whether I should just stay home with Oliver full time. I said no. I didn't quit my corporate job and start a business just to give it up now. We'll make it work. Julian sent another card last month for Oliver's 2-month milestone. Another check. Another short note. Michael threw that one away too. He said he doesn't know if he'll ever let Julian meet Oliver. He said maybe when Oliver is older and can understand the situation. Or maybe never. He said he's leaving that door open, but Julian would have to walk through it with an actual apology and changed behavior. Bonnie said Julian has been dating Jennifer openly now. She said Dan told her Julian brought Jennifer to a family reunion in Clarkston last month and introduced her as his girlfriend. Bonnie said she didn't care. She said Julian could do whatever he wanted with whoever he wanted. She was just glad she wasn't the one dealing with his moods anymore. I ran into Julian once at the grocery store 3 weeks ago. I was pushing Oliver in the cart and Julian was in the checkout line. He saw me and his face went pale. He stared at Oliver for a long moment. I kept walking. I didn't say anything. By the time I finished shopping and came back through, he was gone. Michael asked me later if I'd spoken to him. I said no. Michael said good. He said Julian didn't deserve access to Oliver or to our lives. I agreed, but I also wondered if Michael was protecting Oliver or protecting himself. Maybe both. We're doing okay. Oliver is healthy and growing. Bonnie is a huge help. My parents visit every weekend. Michael is adjusting to being a father and he's good at it. He's patient in ways I didn't expect. He does the midnight feedings without complaining and he'll pace the hallway with Oliver when he's fussy. The business will start back up in January. I have 3 clients waiting and 2 more who want to start contracts in February. It's manageable. Bonnie offered to watch Oliver 2 days a week so we don't have to pay for full-time daycare yet. Michael's firm is flexible about his hours as long as he gets his work done. As for Julian, I don't think about him much anymore. He made his choices. He could have apologized at any point. He could have admitted he was wrong. He could have put his pride aside for his son and his grandson. He didn't. So now he's sending checks in the mail and dating the woman he lied about for years and living alone in a depressing apartment. Bonnie says he's miserable. She says Dan told her Julian barely leaves the apartment except to see Jennifer. She says he's gained weight and he looks older. I don't feel bad about that. I don't feel much of anything about it. Michael still doesn't sleep well. He'll wake up at 3 in the morning and I'll find him sitting in the nursery watching Oliver sleep. I think he's worried he'll turn into his father. I tell him he won't. He's nothing like Julian. But I don't know if he believes me. That's the final update. Julian is out of our lives. Bonnie is building something new. Oliver is here and healthy. Michael and I are tired, but we're making it work. The business will restart soon. Life moves forward. Some people might think we should have handled things differently. Maybe we should have just ignored Julian's comments at that dinner and avoided all of this. But I don't think so. Julian needed to face the reality of what he believed and what he demanded from other people. He couldn't handle it. That's on him. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2. I refused to invite my sister's rude boyfriend to my college graduation party because he insulted my girlfriend and friends. 3 weeks later, my cousin spotted him on a date with another woman the same night as my party, leading to the discovery that he was cheating with at least 3 different women using completely false identities. I'm Harry, 24M, and I'm graduating from college next month. My parents are throwing me a graduation party at our house, and we've been planning it for weeks. The guest list is pretty small, about 40 people including close family, my girlfriend Sarah, 23F, and my best friends from high school and college. Here's where it gets complicated. My sister Carol, 27F, has been dating this guy Steven, 29M, for about 8 months now. They met at her gym and started dating pretty quickly. She brought him to our family dinner 3 months ago, and that's when the problem started. Let me give you some background about Steven. He works in sales at some tech company and thinks he knows everything about everything. The first time I met him, he spent 20 minutes telling me why my computer science degree was useless and how coding jobs were going to be replaced by AI within 5 years. He said I was wasting my time and money on a dead-end field. This was at a family dinner where everyone was supposed to be celebrating my upcoming graduation. Then he started talking about my girlfriend Sarah. She's studying to be a teacher, and Steven went on this long rant about how teachers are overpaid and underworked. He said the education system was broken and that anyone could do what teachers do. Sarah just sat there trying to be polite, but I could see she was getting upset. My parents tried to change the subject, but Steven kept going. The worst part was when he found out Sarah and I have been together for 3 years but don't live together yet. He made some comment about how we must not be that serious if we haven't moved in together, and then he started giving us relationship advice. He said we were probably too young to know what real love was and that most college relationships don't last anyway. My dad finally told him to drop it, but the damage was done. Sarah barely spoke for the rest of the evening, and I was ready to leave. Carol kept making excuses for him, saying he was just trying to be helpful and that he means well. Since then, Steven has been to 2 more family events. At my cousin's birthday party last month, he criticized the food my aunt made, saying it was too salty and that he could have made it better. He also made fun of my uncle's new car, calling it a waste of money and saying he should have bought something more practical. At Easter dinner, he showed up wearing a suit while everyone else was in casual clothes. When my mom asked about it, he said he wanted to make a good impression and that he always dresses professionally. Then he spent the whole meal talking about his job and how much money he makes. He kept asking my parents about their mortgage and giving them financial advice they didn't ask for. The breaking point came 2 weeks ago when Stephen came to my college to pick up Carol after she visited me. I was showing her around campus and introducing her to some of my friends. Stephen walked up to us and immediately started questioning my friends about their majors and career plans. He told one of them that his business degree was too general and that he should have specialized more. He told another friend that art history was a waste of time and money. Then he looked around at the campus and said it was smaller than he expected for the tuition my parents were paying. He asked how much student loan debt I had and whether I thought my degree would actually help me get a job. This was all in front of my friends, who were clearly uncomfortable. Carol just stood there the whole time. She didn't tell him to stop or defend me or my friends. She just nodded along and even laughed when he made a joke about college students being lazy. After they left, my friends asked me who that guy was and why he was so rude. I had to apologize for his behavior, which was embarrassing. One of my friends said Stephen seemed like the type of person who had opinions about everything but knowledge about nothing. So when my parents and I were finalizing the guest list for my graduation party, I told them I didn't want Stephen there. My mom asked why, and I explained everything that had happened. She said she understood but that it might cause problems with Carol. I called Carol to tell her about the party and that Stephen wasn't invited. She immediately got defensive and asked why. I told her about all the things he had said and done, and how he had made Sarah and my friends uncomfortable. She said I was being too sensitive and that Stephen was just trying to fit in with the family. She said it was unfair to exclude him when they had been dating for 8 months and that it would be embarrassing for her to come to my graduation party without her boyfriend. She argued that he was practically family now and that excluding him was disrespectful to their relationship. I told her that 8 months wasn't that long and that he hadn't exactly made a good impression on anyone. She got angry and said I was being selfish and that I should give him another chance. She said he was probably just nervous around new people and that his comments weren't meant to be hurtful. Then she brought up the fact that Sarah was invited, and she said it wasn't fair that my girlfriend could come but hers couldn't. I pointed out that Sarah had never insulted anyone or made rude comments about people's life choices. Carol said that was different because Sarah was quiet and didn't express her opinions. The conversation got heated, and Carol said she might not come to the party if Stephen wasn't invited. She said it would be awkward for her to be there without him and that she didn't want to answer questions about why he wasn't there. She also said our parents would be disappointed if she didn't show up. I told her that was her choice, but I wasn't going to invite someone who had been consistently rude to me, my girlfriend, and my friends. She hung up on me. My parents found out about the argument and called me. They said they wanted to avoid family drama and suggested I reconsider. My dad said Stephen might just need time to adjust to the family and that excluding him could make things worse. My mom said she didn't want Carol to miss my graduation party over this. I explained to them again about all the things Stephen had said and done. They admitted he had been inappropriate, but they said family harmony was important and that one more chance might be worth it. They said they could keep an eye on him during the party and make sure he didn't say anything out of line. But I don't think they understand how uncomfortable he makes everyone. Sarah told me she dreads family events now because of him. My friends still bring up the things he said when they met him. Even my cousin mentioned that Stephen had been rude at her birthday party. I also found out from my uncle that Stephen had cornered him at Easter and tried to sell him some investment opportunity. My uncle said it felt like a sales pitch and that he was uncomfortable the whole time. Stephen apparently gave him a business card and told him to think about it. Carol texted me yesterday saying that Stephen really wants to come to the party and that he's excited to celebrate with the family. She said he's been asking about it and that she's running out of excuses for why he hasn't been officially invited yet. She asked me to please reconsider because it would mean a lot to both of them. But I keep thinking about my graduation party and how I want it to be a celebration with people who actually care about me and support me. I don't want to spend the whole time worrying about what Stephen is going to say or who he's going to offend. I want to be able to relax and enjoy myself with my family and friends. Sarah has been supportive of whatever I decide, but I know she's hoping Stephen won't be there. She's mentioned several times how much more comfortable she feels at family events when he's not around. My friends have also asked if he's going to be at the party, and I can tell they're hoping he won't be. So I'm sticking with my decision. Stephen is not invited to my graduation party. Carol can come if she wants, but I'm not going to compromise on this. It's my graduation, my party, and I want to be surrounded by people who make me feel good about myself and my accomplishments. Am I wrong for this? Should I just invite him to keep the peace? I'm starting to second guess myself because of the pressure from my parents and Carol, but I also don't want to regret my graduation party. Update 1: I wanted to update everyone on what happened with my graduation party situation. Things took a turn I definitely wasn't expecting. First, let me tell you about the party itself. Carol decided to come, but she showed up 2 hours late and left early. She barely spoke to anyone and spent most of the time on her phone. When people asked where Stephen was, she just said he was busy with work. It was obvious she was upset, but I was glad I stuck to my decision because the party was actually really fun without him there. Sarah was much more relaxed, and my friends had a great time. My parents seemed to enjoy themselves too, and they didn't bring up Stephen at all during the party. Everyone was focused on celebrating my graduation, which is exactly what I wanted. But here's where things got interesting. 3 days after the party, I got a call from my cousin Lisa, 25F, who was at the party. She asked if I had time to talk about something important regarding Carol and Stephen. I was curious, so I said yes. Lisa told me that she had been at a restaurant downtown the night of my graduation party, and she saw Stephen there. He was having dinner with another woman, and they looked very cozy. Lisa said she wasn't sure if she should say anything, but she thought I should know since it might affect Carol. I was shocked. Lisa described the woman as blonde, probably in her early 30s, and said they were holding hands across the table. She said Stephen was dressed up nice, like he was on a date, and they were laughing and talking like they knew each other well. Lisa took a picture from far away because she couldn't believe what she was seeing. I didn't know what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to tell Carol right away, but another part of me thought maybe Lisa was wrong about what she saw. I decided to do some investigating first. I asked Lisa to send me the picture, and sure enough, it was definitely Stephen. The woman with him was attractive and looked like she was around his age. They were sitting close together at a small table, and Stephen had his hand on top of hers. The timestamp on the photo showed it was taken at 8:30 p.m. on the night of my party. I started thinking about Stephen's behavior at family events. He always seemed to be checking his phone and stepping outside to take calls. Carol had mentioned that he was busy with work a lot and that he traveled for his job sometimes. Now I was wondering if there was more to it. I decided to talk to Sarah about it first. She was as surprised as I was, but she said she had always thought something was off about Stephen. She said he seemed like the type of person who would have multiple things going on at once. She suggested I talk to Carol, but carefully. The problem was that Carol and I still weren't talking much after the graduation party situation. She had been cold to me ever since, and I knew she was still upset about Stephen not being invited. I wasn't sure how to bring this up without making things worse between us. I decided to wait a few days and see if anything else happened. During that time, I started paying more attention to Carol's social media posts. She had been posting a lot about Stephen over the past few months, calling him her boyfriend and posting pictures of them together. But looking back at his social media, he barely posted anything about her. His Instagram was mostly pictures of him at work events, at the gym, or out with friends. There were only a few pictures with Carol, and they were all from the past month. It seemed like he had only recently started acknowledging their relationship publicly. I also noticed that Carol had been posting about wanting to meet Stephen's friends and family, but she had never mentioned actually meeting them. She had asked my parents several times when Stephen was going to bring his parents to meet them, but it never happened. He always had an excuse for why they couldn't make it. A week after Lisa told me about seeing Stephen, I decided I had to talk to Carol. I called her and asked if we could meet for coffee to talk about things. She was hesitant at first, but she agreed to meet me. When we met, Carol immediately started talking about how hurt she was that Stephen wasn't invited to my party. She said he had been really looking forward to it and that she felt like I had embarrassed her in front of the family. She said Stephen had been asking her about when he was going to be included in more family events. I let her talk for a while, and then I asked her how things were going with Stephen in general. She said they were great and that she was really happy with him. She said they had been talking about moving in together and that she thought he might be the one. That's when I decided to tell her about what Lisa had seen. I was gentle about it and said I didn't know what it meant, but I thought she should know. Carol's face went white, and she asked me to show her the picture. When she saw it, she stared at it for a long time without saying anything. Then she asked me when it was taken. When I told her it was the night of my graduation party, she got quiet. She said Stephen had told her he was working late that night and couldn't come to the party even if he had been invited. Carol asked me not to tell anyone else about this while she figured out what to do. She said she needed to talk to Stephen first and get his explanation. I agreed, but I told her I was worried about her and that she deserved better than someone who would lie to her. She left the coffee shop without saying much else, and I could tell she was processing everything. I felt bad for being the one to show her the picture, but I also knew she needed to know the truth. 2 days later, Carol called me crying. She said she had confronted Stephen about the picture, and he had gotten angry and defensive. He said it was just a work colleague and that they were discussing a business deal. He said Lisa was probably just trying to cause trouble and that I was using this as an excuse to break them up because I didn't like him. Carol said she asked him why he hadn't told her about the dinner, and he said it wasn't important enough to mention. She asked him about other things too, like why she had never met his friends or family, and why he was always so busy with work. He said she was being paranoid and that she needed to trust him more. The conversation had ended with Stephen leaving Carol's apartment and saying he needed some space to think about their relationship. Carol said she hadn't heard from him since, and that was 3 days ago. She said she was confused and didn't know what to believe. I tried to be supportive and told her that if Stephen was telling the truth, he would be willing to prove it. I said an innocent business dinner wouldn't be something he'd need to hide, and that his reaction to being questioned seemed suspicious. Carol admitted that she had been having doubts about Stephen for a while but had been ignoring them. She said he had been distant lately and that she felt like she was always trying to impress him. She said she realized she didn't actually know much about his life outside of their relationship. As of right now, Carol still hasn't heard from Stephen. She's been staying at our parents' house because she doesn't want to be alone. She said she's starting to think that maybe I was right about him all along, and she's angry at herself for not seeing it sooner. I'm not sure what's going to happen next, but I'm glad Carol knows the truth now. I just hope she doesn't blame me for the way things turned out. Update 2. I have another update about the Steven situation, and it's gotten much worse than I expected. Carol has been staying at our parents' house for the past month, and we've all been trying to support her through this difficult time. After my last update, Steven continued to avoid Carol for about a week. She was going crazy trying to figure out what was happening and whether she should believe his explanation about the dinner being work-related. She kept calling and texting him, but he would only respond with short messages saying he needed time to think. Finally, Carol decided she wasn't going to wait around anymore. She drove to his apartment one evening to talk to him face to face. When she got there, she saw the same blonde woman from the restaurant photo leaving his building. Carol said the woman was clearly comfortable there and had keys to get in and out. Carol confronted the woman in the parking lot and asked who she was. The woman seemed confused and said she was Steven's girlfriend. When Carol said she was also Steven's girlfriend, the woman looked shocked. They ended up sitting in Carol's car for an hour comparing stories about their relationships with Steven. The woman's name was Jennifer, 31F, and she had been dating Steven for over a year. She said they had been talking about getting engaged and that she had met his parents and most of his friends. She showed Carol pictures on her phone of her and Steven at family events and vacations together. Jennifer said Steven had told her he was working late or traveling for business on the nights when he was actually with Carol. She had no idea Carol existed. Jennifer also said Steven had been pushing her to move in with him and that they had been looking at apartments together. Carol was devastated. She realized that she had been the other woman this entire time without knowing it. Steven had been lying to both of them and playing them against each other. Jennifer was just as shocked and upset as Carol was. They decided to confront Steven together. They went up to his apartment, and Jennifer used her key to let them in. Steven was there watching TV, and his face went white when he saw both of them walk in together. Carol said Steven immediately started making excuses and trying to explain. He said his relationship with Jennifer was complicated and that they had been having problems. He said he had been planning to break up with Jennifer but hadn't found the right time. He told Carol that she was the one he really wanted to be with. But Jennifer wasn't having any of it. She said they hadn't been having problems and that Steven had been lying to her for months. She showed him text messages where he had been talking about their future together and making plans for trips they were supposed to take. Steven then tried to turn it around on both of them. He said Carol was being crazy and stalking him, and that Jennifer was being controlling and not giving him space. He said he was a grown man and could date whoever he wanted. He said neither of them owned him. Carol said that was the moment she realized what kind of person Steven really was. He wasn't sorry for lying to them or for hurting them. He was just angry that he got caught. She said Jennifer looked just as disgusted as she felt. Both women left his apartment that night and didn't look back. Carol said she felt embarrassed and stupid for not seeing the signs earlier, but she was also relieved to know the truth finally. Jennifer and Carol exchanged contact information and have actually become friends through this whole situation. Jennifer told Carol about other red flags she had noticed but ignored. She said Steven was always secretive about his phone and would get upset if she asked questions about his schedule. She said he also had a way of making her feel like she was being too needy whenever she wanted to spend more time together. Carol realized that Steven had been using the same tactics on her. He had made her feel like she was asking for too much whenever she wanted to meet his friends or family. He had convinced her that she was being clingy when she questioned why he was always busy. The worst part was that Carol found out Steven had been lying about his job too. Jennifer said he didn't actually work for a tech company like he had told Carol. He worked for a small insurance company and wasn't in sales like he had claimed. Most of his stories about work trips and important meetings were completely made up. Carol said she felt like she didn't know Steven at all. Everything about him had been a lie, from his job to his relationship status to his family background. She said she was angry at herself for believing him for so long and for defending him to our family. Our parents have been really supportive of Carol through all of this. My mom said she never trusted Steven and that she always felt like he was trying too hard to impress everyone. My dad said he thought Steven was arrogant and that he didn't like how he treated Carol. I felt bad for Carol, but I also felt vindicated that my instincts about Steven had been right. I had known something was off about him from the beginning, but I hadn't expected it to be this bad. I was just glad Carol found out the truth before she got in any deeper with him. Carol has been going through Steven's social media accounts and finding more evidence of his lies. She found pictures of him with other women that he had never mentioned to her. She also found posts about events and trips that he had never told her about. It was like he had been living a completely different life that she knew nothing about. The hardest part for Carol has been accepting that she wasted 8 months of her life on someone who didn't care about her at all. She said she had been planning a future with Steven and had started changing her own plans to accommodate him. She had turned down job opportunities in other cities because she wanted to stay near him. Carol also had to deal with the embarrassment of telling her friends what had happened. She had been bragging about Steven to everyone and had been planning to bring him to her friend's wedding next month. Now she had to explain to everyone that he had been cheating on her and lying about everything. Jennifer has been helpful in this process because she's going through the same thing. They've been supporting each other and sharing information about Steven's lies. Jennifer said she's also had to tell her friends and family about what happened, and it's been humiliating for her too. As for Stephen, he's been trying to contact both Carol and Jennifer, but they've both blocked him on everything. He showed up at Carol's work once, but she had security escort him out. He's also been calling our parents' house, but we've all been ignoring his calls. Carol said she's not interested in hearing anything Stephen has to say. She said there's nothing he could say that would make up for the months of lies and deception. She just wants to move on with her life and forget he ever existed. Carol has started looking for her own apartment again since she had been planning to move in with Stephen. She's also been focusing on her career and reconnecting with friends she had neglected while she was dating him. She said she's learned a lot about herself through this experience and about what she wants in a relationship. I'm proud of Carol for how she's handled everything. It would have been easy for her to make excuses for Stephen or to try to work things out with him, but she chose to walk away. She said she deserves better than someone who would lie to her and cheat on her. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't invite Stephen to my graduation party. I can't imagine having to deal with this drama on what was supposed to be a special day for me. Carol has admitted that she's glad too, because it would have been even more embarrassing if more of our family had gotten to know him. Update 3. I wanted to give everyone a final update on the Stephen situation since a lot of you have been asking about how Carol is doing. It's been 3 months since everything came out, and there have been some interesting developments. Carol has been doing much better. She found a nice apartment close to her work and has been focusing on rebuilding her life. She's been going out with friends more and has even started dating again, though she's taking things very slowly this time. She said the experience with Stephen taught her to pay more attention to red flags and to trust her instincts. Jennifer and Carol have remained friends, which is kind of strange but also nice. They've been helping each other heal from what Stephen did to them. Jennifer ended up moving to a different city for a job opportunity, but they still keep in touch regularly. About 2 months ago, Carol got a call from another woman who had found her contact information through Jennifer. This woman, whose name was Rachel, 28F, said she had been dating Stephen for about 4 months. She had seen Jennifer's social media posts about what happened and realized Stephen had been lying to her too. Rachel said Stephen had told her he was recently single and looking for something serious. He had been using the same lines on her that he had used on Carol and Jennifer. Rachel said she had started to suspect something was wrong when Stephen was always unavailable on certain days of the week and wouldn't let her stay at his apartment overnight. Carol told Rachel everything that had happened and showed her the evidence they had collected about Stephen's lies. Rachel was shocked but grateful to know the truth. She said she had been starting to have feelings for Stephen and was glad she found out before things went too far. It turns out Stephen had been dating at least 3 women at the same time, possibly more. Rachel said she had done some investigating and found dating profiles for Stephen on multiple apps, all with different information about his job and interests. He had been using completely different personas for each relationship. Carol reported this information to the police, not because she expected them to do anything about the dating situation, but because she was concerned about the identity fraud aspects of what Stephen was doing. The police said they couldn't do much about the dating lies, but they took note of the false information he had been using about his employment. Carol also found out that Stephen had been using her credit card information to pay for dates with other women. She had given him her card number once to order takeout for them, and he had saved it and been using it without her permission. She had to dispute several charges and get a new credit card. The bank was able to reverse most of the charges, but it was still a hassle. Around the same time, Carol got a call from Stephen's actual employer. Apparently, Stephen had been using Carol's work address as his home address on some official documents, and they needed to verify his correct information. Carol told them what had happened and gave them Stephen's real address. The HR representative said they were dealing with some issues regarding Stephen's employment but couldn't give Carol any details. A few weeks later, Carol found out through mutual acquaintances that Stephen had been fired from his job. She didn't know the exact reason, but she suspected it might have been related to his lying about personal information or possibly using company resources for his dating schemes. Carol also discovered that Stephen had been telling different stories about his family to different women. He had told Carol that his parents lived in another state and were too busy to meet her. He had told Jennifer that his parents were dead. He had told Rachel that his parents were divorced and he didn't get along with them. None of these stories were true. His parents actually lived about an hour away from where he lived. The most disturbing thing Carol found out was that Stephen had been taking pictures of her without her knowledge and sharing them with other people. She found out about this when one of her coworkers mentioned seeing pictures of her on a dating app profile that wasn't hers. The pictures were ones Stephen had taken of her during their relationship, and he had been using them to catfish other women. Carol was horrified and immediately reported this to the police as well as to the dating app companies. Most of the fake profiles were taken down, but Carol said it made her feel violated knowing that Stephen had been using her image without her consent. Carol decided to warn other women in the area about Stephen by posting about her experience on local social media groups and dating app review sites. She was careful to stick to facts and not say anything that could be considered defamatory, but she wanted other women to know what kind of person he was. Several women reached out to Carol after seeing her posts. Some of them had dated Stephen briefly and had similar experiences with his lying and manipulation. Others had matched with him on dating apps but something had felt off, so they hadn't met him in person. Carol said it was validating to know that other people had picked up on the same red flags she had missed. Stephen tried to contact Carol a few more times over the past few months, but she has maintained no contact with him. He sent her a long email claiming that she had ruined his life by telling people about what he had done. He said she was vindictive and that she should have handled things privately instead of involving other people. Carol showed the email to our parents and to me, and we all agreed that it showed Stephen still didn't understand that he was the problem. He wasn't taking responsibility for his actions and was still trying to make Carol feel guilty. Carol didn't respond to the email and blocked his email address. The last Carol heard, Stephen had moved to a different city. She doesn't know if he's still trying to date multiple women at once, but she hopes the women in his new city are smarter than she was and can see through his lies more quickly. Carol said this whole experience has changed her perspective on dating and relationships. She's more cautious now but also more confident in her ability to recognize when something isn't right. She said she's grateful that she found out the truth when she did instead of wasting more time on Stephen. Our family has grown closer through all of this. Carol and I have a better relationship now, and she's admitted that I was right to be suspicious of Stephen from the beginning. She said she wishes she had listened to my concerns instead of getting defensive about them. Carol has also apologized to Sarah for defending Stephen when he was rude to her at family dinners. Sarah was very understanding and said she was just glad Carol was okay. They'd become closer friends through this whole situation. My parents have been great support for Carol throughout everything. They've helped her move into her new apartment and have been there for her emotionally when she needed to talk. They've also said they're proud of how she handled the situation once she knew the truth. As for me, I'm just glad this whole thing is over. I feel bad that Carol had to go through such a difficult experience, but I'm proud of how strong she's been. She could have easily fallen back into a pattern of making excuses for Stephen or trying to work things out with him, but she chose to prioritize her own well-being instead. Carol is doing well now and seems much happier than she was when she was dating Stephen. She's more like her old self again, and it's nice to have my sister back. She's learned a lot about herself and what she wants in a relationship, and I think she'll be much better at spotting red flags in the future. This whole situation has also made me appreciate my relationship with Sarah even more. We've been through some challenges together, but we've always been honest with each other and supportive of each other's goals. It's made me realize how important trust and communication are in a relationship. I'm grateful that my instincts about Stephen were right, even though I wish Carol hadn't had to go through all of this to learn the truth. Sometimes the people who seem the most charming and confident are the ones you need to be most careful about. Carol learned that lesson the hard way, but she's stronger now because of it.